is the WGNS Action Line. Now, your host, Scott Walker.
Now joining us in studio this morning, we have Professor Amy Sayward with MTSU and the head of the American Democracy Project. How are you this morning?
I'm great. Thank you so much.
Tell us about this program and what is coming up at MTSU and what is celebration of the 250th anniversary of America.
So the American Democracy Project's been around almost 25 years. We promote civic engagement by students through voter registration and other things. But this year, of course, with the Semiquincentennial, we are focused on celebrating and educating people about the ideals of the Declaration of Independence across the entire year. And our programming is kicking off this coming week. I'm glad we didn't have programming scheduled for this week.
Yeah, this would have been a rough week.
It really would have. But we're starting on Monday with our first Buchanan Honors Lecture. Professor Lynn Nelson is going to be talking about what the American Revolution meant to the people who were Tennesseans at the time. That small sort of set of settlements out in East Tennessee. That's his area of expertise.
This will be interesting. And to help put all this together, from what I understand, you got a special grant for the National Endowment for the Humanities to help with this.
We did. We won a $25,000 grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities. It is a matching grant, so MTSU is also working on raising $25,000 to support programming across the year.
Who all is involved in putting all this together at MTSU?
So I have a big committee. Dean Weil in the Honors College is probably the most enthusiastic promoter of our Semiquincentennial. But both the Honors Lecture Series in the spring and the fall will be organized around the Semiquincentennial. We're celebrating Evacuation Day activities.
Evacuation Day activities.
Evacuation Day. Happy to tell you a little bit more.
What is that?
So most people haven't heard about Evacuation Day. I was doing a little research to find a meaningful revolutionary anniversary during the spring semester. And Americans, and especially Bostonians, used to celebrate the day that the British evacuated Boston. Huh. So after the battles of Bunker Hill and the battles surrounding that, the British pulled out of Boston, and not surprisingly, the people of Boston celebrated March 17th. The reason that we don't hear about Evacuation Day as much, the Irish immigration into Boston, St. Patrick's Day celebrations sort of eclipse those earlier Evacuation Day activities.
Interesting. And I interrupted you asking what that was, but okay, so tell us more about all of this.
Yeah, so on that day on campus, which is the Tuesday after our spring break, Professor Kathleen O'Connell in Art and Design is going to be printing copies of the Declaration of Independence preamble on our replica of the Franklin Press. So anyone in the community can make a reservation and come between noon and 4 and, slather on the ink on the press and crank it down and walk away with their very own copy of the Declaration preamble. And she's working to find the typeset that appeared in the newspaper on July 5th. So it will have that sort of real connection to the history.
Like old school screen printing almost, I guess.
A lot more physical activity connected than the screenshotting, but yes.
So where did she find the tools to do all of this?
So this prints is really her expertise, and she says it is challenging to still find the supplies and the typesets and such, but our grant is helping to pay for those supplies, the ink and the mats and all of the typeset for that day. We'll also be reading the Declaration of Independence at 1 o'clock on that day, much like we do the Constitution. In the fall, we'll be reading the Declaration of Independence. A lot of folks are familiar with the preamble part, but a lot of folks haven't read through all. It's not as long as the Constitution. It won't be as super long. When we read the Constitution, it's about an hour and 5 minutes. This will be much shorter.
And again, what day is that happening on?
That will be March 17th, coming up much more quickly, this coming Thursday, we're partnering with Nashville PBS, and we're going to be in Tucker Theater. We're going to show a digest of the Ken Burns documentary, so about 35 minutes of that 13-hour documentary, and it'll be followed by a panel of 4 historians who can talk about some of the things that were and weren't in that digest, and then answer questions from anyone in the audience. And we're running that twice on Thursday. The first time at 1 o'clock to be more open for the campus community and folks who don't want to be out after dark. And then again at 6 o'clock for the community sort of after work. So we hope that everyone will come out. The event is completely free. There will be reserved parking in the baseball parking lot, which is right next to Tucker Theater.
So this Ken Burns documentary that you're gonna play excerpts out of, I mean, put all together and everything, I'm sure it's interesting. Is it kind of a snapshot of America and how everything got started, and then a look over the years? What is it?
It's really focused on how this war of the American Revolution that starts almost a full year before the Declaration of Independence and continues until 1781. So it's a long war. How it touches every part of what had been the colonies, how it affects every part of society. It looks at and pulls in parts of the Revolution that we may not have learned about as much in school. Abigail Adams and sort of the women who were sort of the support troops, cooking, taking care of them. They're focused. The 10% of the Continental Army that was made up of African Americans, some of the indigenous people who chose to fight with the Americans, and of course the majority kept to their treaties with the British. Our Tennesseans on the frontier, they are fighting right immediately after the Declaration of Independence in the area over at Sycamore Shoals State Historic Park. They have a replica of that fort where they were fighting in 1776 against the Cherokee, who were allied with the British, and the Watauga settlement there had clearly chosen that they were going to fight with the Continental Congress right from the beginning.
But the American Revolution, I mean, when you look back at different fights, wars, conflicts, across America and across the globe, that's one that it's more interesting to study just because it's America itself. I mean, it's going to be interesting.
It is, because America has always been that sort of melting pot, right? Bringing all these different people with all of their different experiences, and somehow around these ideals of the Declaration of Independence, that idea that all men are created equal, endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, that's what brings this diverse set of folks together, gives them the will to persist through this long and brutal war all the way to the end. And those ideals don't just stay here, right? They reverberate through the entire Atlantic world. This time period historians call the Age of Revolutions. And a couple of our honors lectures are going to talk about how those ideas moved to the French Revolution, how they moved to the Haitian Revolution. Those ideas take on a life of their own from the Declaration of Independence all the way forward.
And the Haitian Revolution involving the British, that's one that people really don't even think about these days, and that, I don't know what year that occurred, but that's supposedly what Columbus, he first landed there. I mean, there's just a lot there in Haiti as well.
Yeah, it's a particularly brutal revolution. You have because of that early landing and the Columbian Exchange, you have predominantly an enslaved population, and the French are fighting against them to maintain the richness of that sort of those sugar plantations. It's the first Black Republic. Toussaint Louverture is the leader of that, and that revolution also sort of sets in motion a lot of talk about liberation of enslaved peoples. Is it sustainable? Whether you're talking about Brazil, whether you're talking about the United States, really starts again an Atlantic conversation around issues of enslavement.
And then the fort, the Citadel in Haiti, it still stands today on one of the, highest peaks in Haiti. Mm-hmm. It's fascinating. And then when you look at the American Revolution, all of this tremendous. I mean, all the history there is just fascinating. And like, as you were talking about America being the melting pot, you saw that kind of being formed in the American Revolution with all these different backgrounds coming together to fight in order to make America, basically.
And in some ways, those wonderful ideals that we focus on in the Declaration of Independence, that was almost easier, picking the big ideals when we see those same folks, many of the same folks sitting down to work on the Constitution, trying to figure out exactly what that means and how it's going to work out in our government. It gets a little bit stickier. But those ideals, at the beginning of the Ken Burns documentary, they talk about how those ideals resonate so much. They're really those platonic ideals, right, that we can't ever really get to. We can only ever strive for.
And again, this is all going to be part of this 250th anniversary, if you would, and it starts next week on the MTSU campus.
Yes, we're starting on Monday. Also, our partners over at Stones River National Battlefield, they are putting together a Rutherford County semi-quincentennial passport, much like if you've been to any of our state parks, the state park passport that'll have stamps and a list of activities. So MTSU is very excited to be part of that. And the Rutherford County Chamber of Commerce and Visitors Bureau is very much working to maintain a website that will show what's happening across the county for the entire year. And so I certainly encourage folks to look at that. At MTSU, we have our own semi-quincentennial calendar. We're a little light in the summer when the rest of the county is going to pick up with programming, but we're excited to be kicking things off here next week.
This is going to be fascinating, for a lot of people, because like you were saying, in school, we learn bits and pieces about the American Revolution, but we really, at least when I was in high school, for example, we didn't learn the full background. We didn't learn, there's a lot of stuff that was left out.
And it surprises me. So I grew up in New York. I've been in Tennessee for the last 27 years. But growing up in New York, you hear all about, Lexington and Concord and even some of the battles in New York. And then it's like there's this long pause, and then we have Yorktown. The American Revolution in the South is largely ignored. Even if you look at the commemorative stamps that came out from the U.S. Postal Service, similarly, it's like Lexington and Concord and then Yorktown. And we skip the fact that the British Army invaded Savannah, moved through Georgia, was moving through the Carolinas, that Tennesseans, our over mountain men, crossed the mountains in order to engage Patrick Ferguson and the Loyalist troops at the Battle of Kings Mountain, and really helped push that army away from the Appalachians towards Yorktown and its ultimate defeat. But we don't hear much about the American Revolution in the South. Even in 13 hours of Ken Burns' documentary, there's not as much as I would have liked to have seen about the American Revolution in the South.
It's really hard to imagine and even believe, for a lot of people, all the fighting that took place in America as it was being formed, and then almost 100 years later, the Civil War that took place. I mean, it's just, there were so many battles.
There are a lot of battles, a lot of unsung heroes across those time periods, right? Ordinary Americans. One of the reasons when my husband and I were watching, he's like, why does he keep talking about all of these women? I said, well, because people picked up and they just joined the army. And it wasn't that you were going to stay at home. These were a lot of sort of working class people who decided to commit. And it was the entire family committing to go and support this cause. And it wasn't just George Washington and his Continental Army. It was militias in every one of those states that was fighting. Every area had its own dynamics. And Americans, or, colonists at the time, were having to pick which side. A lot of Americans, tens of thousands, said, well, no, I'm loyal to the British Crown. And they found themselves, fleeing the United States, going to Canada, heading off to the Caribbean, or fighting against American patriots. We see that in that Battle of Kings Mountain.
So you had all these different fights going on. You had people fleeing one country for another. I mean, it was just one battle after another, and so many involved. And I don't even know if we know the true numbers.
Probably the revolution, I would argue, probably touched 80 to 85% of all Americans.
That's amazing.
Because it is hitting almost every one of the colonies. The Ken Burns documentary, he likes to sort of bookend his documentaries, and he looks at one family that ends up trying to flee the fighting, and they end up in Yorktown. So they're involved at the beginning and at the end of the war.
And to travel distances like that back then, it took, a year for a family to travel from one area of the country to the East Coast to wherever. I mean, it took a long time.
Well, and I'm amazed. Again, our Tennessee over mountain men, they start at Sycamore Shoals and they cross the Appalachians, not on any interstates, not on any highways, but traversing that entire area, on foot with their horses, carrying the supplies that they needed in order to fight right there on the South Carolina, North Carolina border.
And to hike the Appalachians today, even with all the equipment you can buy, that's extremely tough, especially during the different seasons.
Yeah. What
these folks went through was, extraordinary in a lot of ways, and it's hard to imagine, I would say, for people today.
And those over mountain men were particularly worried as they crossed the mountains to fight the British, whether there might be attacks, particularly by the Cherokee against the settlements, as most of those fighting men had left. We also have, in that same year of Kings Mountain, is when James Robertson and Donaldson are establishing Fort Nashboro. So even as America is fighting for its independence, Tennessee is expanding, sort of doubling, moving from just it being in East Tennessee to also the settlement there in Middle Tennessee.
Is Fort Nashboro the exhibit of or recreation of Fort Nashboro? Is that still on the Cumberland River there in downtown?
It is. It is. It's really dwarfed by all of the skyscrapers around it these days, much like the Old North Church in Boston, right? It was the center point of that community, the tallest building at the time, and now it's surrounded by skyscrapers. So that's what happens in our modern cities. Those historical sites end up sort of dwarfed by the modern buildings, but certainly still there. I appreciate one of the things too that we're doing on February 3rd is we're partnering with the Sons of the American Revolution. We're doing a teacher workshop for our students who are studying education at the university about the resources that the Sons of the American Revolution have to help our teachers in the area. They're called Patriot Chests. They are contain a whole series of sort of hands-on activities and materials to engage students in K through 12 education. So they'll be there, as well as we'll be sharing more about the PBS teaching resources that are available. And Nashville PBS is bringing a couple teachers who have also been doing podcasts with their students around ideas of freedom and the American Revolution. So we've got a lot going on this coming week. Again,
Professor Amy Sayward with us today. And once more, all of this begins next week on the MTSU campus. And this is basically a year-long ongoing celebration or historical anniversary with lots of documentation for folks to learn about all throughout the year, again, starting next week. Where can people learn more about all of this? So we are maintaining and always updating our MTSU semi-quincentennial calendar. So if you just type in MTSU America 250, easier to spell than semi-quincentennial, you'll be able to see that calendar as we continue to add materials. Also, again, the Rutherford County Chamber of Commerce and Board of Visitors is maintaining a calendar of all of the activities across Rutherford County, and Stones River National Battlefield is working on that Rutherford County semi-quincentennial passport, which we hope to have at the Evacuation Day celebrations. And that passport, for those who are maybe traveling later this coming summer, they can go to some of the different locations, I guess, that involved the revolution. Yes, absolutely. And we're also partnering with Cannonsburg Village this summer. Dean Weil and the Honors College is going to have an exhibit around America's celebrations of these key anniversaries of the Declaration of Independence. He'll be giving a lecture, and we may have some repeats of these honors lecture series just downtown.
down so that folks can enjoy those closer to the January 4th anniversary.
And again, the great big Ben Franklin press, all of that giant machine is going to be at MTSU, and then y'all will be printing copies of the Declaration of Independence.
Yes, we'll just be doing the preamble, a little bit easier than doing the two-sided, but we'll be doing that on Evacuation Day, March 17th. Better known as St. Patrick's Day, from noon until 4. Anyone in the community can make a reservation. There's a little QR code on our poster, and you don't have to commit to a specific time. We just have to limit it to 100 people over the course of those 4 hours to give everyone an opportunity.
And that's, again, another learning opportunity right there, to see, I guess, what went into, for example, making a newspaper, the printing that went along with it. It was much different than today.
Very much so. And also the College of Media and Entertainment is also going to have a lecture that week about the role of the press in the American Revolution. Americans at the time of the Revolution were the most literate area in the entire world.
I didn't know that.
That meant 50% of adults could read and write.
50%.
But wow. That made us the most literate, and those newspapers were shared across, orally as well as being read. It was one of the things that spread those ideas of the revolution and led Americans to pick sides, to choose to fight for, those ideals in the Declaration of Independence.
And we're already out of time. But again, Professor Sayward with us today from MTSU. And once more, online, where can people learn about all this?
Again, just Google MTSU and America 250, and you'll see our entire calendar of events and where you can make your reservation to print your own Declaration of Independence.
Sounds good. Well, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much.